Hey, Cross Park, welcome to your weekly leadership update. As many of you know, I tend to take most of my vacation time in the summer, and so we're out the last 2 weeks. We were at the beach with family, and we have some other vacation days later this summer, but I had a great time. I'm really glad to be back at Cross Park. A couple of announcements before we talk together about the Psalms for a few minutes. If you weren't with us last Sunday, you may have missed that our youth search team has been successful in their task. They searched long and hard and did a great job of combing through resumes and talking to potential candidates, and ultimately narrowed it down to Andrew Luckenbill. And we have hired Andrew to be our new youth director. We are excited that Andrew and Morgan and Lizzie Kate will be joining us in August. So I ask you right now to both thank the Lord and celebrate, but also to pray for them. You can imagine young family moving to town, summer heat, transition. There's so much stress that will be in their lives in the next couple of months. Pray for them. We're excited about having them and benefiting from their ministry, and we want to be helpful to them as they transition. So pray for them and thank the Lord that He's led us to the right person. Secondly, you may have heard us a few times talk about a ministry called Alongside Families. This is a ministry that does exactly what its name says. It comes alongside families who are in difficulty, transition, and who maybe have not been able to make the social service system work very well for their particular needs. Alongside Families is a Christian organization that loves to come alongside people in those circumstances and provide various things for them, provide help, mentoring, provide child care. And it's actually a way oftentimes to help a family that might end up sort of lost a bit in the foster system, or have kids that don't really need to enter the foster system, but there's nowhere else to put them. And Alongside Families is a great way to come alongside those folks and help them through that difficult time of transition. So as we have had some of our members participate with Alongside Families, particularly the Clark family, and then as some of the leadership, as we have met Michelle, one of our women's care team members, Rickman Logan, one of our deacons, and myself met with Vivian from Alongside Families. We were super encouraged by their ministry and want to partner more substantially with them. So in light of that, on July 30th after church, we were having an interest meeting. It's just what it sounds like. You don't have to commit to anything. If you have any interest in seeing how you could participate in Alongside Families, there are a wide variety of ways to participate in Alongside Families. Church needs people who can have different roles and different gifts and different skills to be able to play different roles to help these families when we have opportunities to do so. So if you have any interest in hearing more about how this ministry works, right after the service around 11 o'clock on Sunday, July 30th, that's 2 weeks from this coming Sunday, we'll have about a 1-hour interest meeting in the Magnolia Room. So July 30th, 1 hour after church. Please come join us and hear more about Alongside Families. Well, this Sunday, in addition to our normal elements, we're excited to have Andres Garza join us. Andres is the executive director of City to City Latin America, and many of you have heard that this is a new ministry that we are partnering with, that we're really excited about. We sent our vision trip to Lima and Quito, and we are so happy to have Andres in town and with us Sunday morning, sharing how God's at work through this ministry that we are partnering with. So you will enjoy hearing from Andres. Well, this Sunday we are continuing our sermon series. It's a playlist for the journey home, and our next song in the playlist is Psalm 129. And Psalm 129, as you will notice, is a lament. On my vacation for my quiet time, I was working through the first 14 Psalms of the Bible, and many of them are laments. And particularly, I was struck by Psalm 13, which in Psalms studies is often considered a classic lament psalm, which means it has all the primary core elements that define a lament psalm. And so I wanted us to think a little bit about what those are. What does it mean to lament? We've talked about this a lot. Someone joked with me the other day. They were asking if my D-Men project is in lament. It isn't. It's in that general direction, but it's not about lament particularly. But we talk a lot about lament at Cross Park, in part because the Bible talks a lot about lament and because we're not so good at it. When I say we're not so good at it, I mean two things. I mean that our culture broadly is not good at lament, and our Christian subculture is also not good at lament. Now, I do think in some ways the broader American culture, Western culture, is at the moment pretty good at noticing things that are bad, at saying, hey, things aren't as they should be. Let's be honest about that and call them out. Let's point out and critique systems of oppression. Let's point out and critique ways we've mistreated people. That, in many ways, is a strength of our current culture. The problem is that it's a rather narrow foundation upon which we make those claims. We're good at proclaiming something is bad. We're good at proclamation and cancellation and declaration. We're good at saying, these things are bad. There are bad things. They should not be that way. But the problem is, we all know that there's not a whole lot behind that. There's not a lot of moral force behind it. There's no truth or transcendence, at least not deep and agreed upon truth and transcendence. We have sort of the sense of, well, we all know that's not right or that's not true, but we don't all know that. We don't all agree on it. And so, although we're good at pointing out things that are bad, we're not very good at being able to give a reason or an answer why those things are bad. So that's what's true of our culture: good at critique and proclamation, but not so good at true lamentation. Now, for the Christian subculture, we are not so good at being honest about the hard things. Oftentimes, we're not so clear on what's hard and why. We actually feel a bit like we're not allowed to talk about suffering and difficulty. I think in some ways we have weak stomachs for the hard stuff. We think that somehow talking about the hard things, talking about suffering and pain, might somehow invalidate God or our belief in Him. We are told we're supposed to trust and obey, and that we're supposed to have an eternal perspective. And these things, although those are true, they get in the way of honest lamentation. We're not able to say, here's what's really wrong, and we're going to present that honestly before God. And so we tend to do one of two things. We don't talk about pain honestly because we feel like it's going to be invalidating or dishonoring to God. Or we feel the pain deeply. We feel like we're not supposed to feel those things, and we're just sort of confused about what to do with them next, and we sit on them and they stew in us. So the Psalms show us a much better way. The Psalms are showing us that we will and must feel grief, and that in fact the way to talk about grief is to talk about it before God, to lament to Him. And so, as I said, Psalm 13 gives us sort of the key elements of lament. First, it's spoken directly to God. Again, this is the difference between venting and lamenting. Venting can be to yourself or to the air or to some friends, and it can be useful. But lamenting is directly to God. We're saying to God, you are God, you are good, you are sovereign, and these things that we see or experiencing don't make sense to us. They are wrong. They ought not to be this way. What are you going to do about it? Don't you agree? Do you see this? And you see in Psalm 13 a series of questions. And the questions there are not looking for information exactly. Rather, the questions are a form of protest. They are saying to God, don't you see how bad these things are? Are you going to do something about them? Don't you want to do something about them? And so this first big element of lament is its protest to God. Secondly, the second sort of big element you see is the ask, the petition. We ask God to hear us and to help us. And in many ways, hearing and helping are two sides of the same coin. If God hears you, just the fact of His hearing is that we know that we're not alone, that we know that the world isn't utterly chaotic and random. If God hears us, that is a form of help. And if there's any kind of practical help, relief, a change of circumstances, whenever God seems to enter in and provide some sort of relief or rescue, that help proves that He hears us. So hearing and helping really are two sides of the same coin, but typically in lament psalms we're asking for God to hear us and help us, and oftentimes the psalm will also say something like, have mercy, show grace. So hear me, help me, grace me. Psalm 13 then closes with a statement of trust. So it starts with protest, and then it has petition, and then really at the end it has great praise. And you see this in the vast majority of lament psalms, almost all of them, with maybe two exceptions. There's 88 and 44. There's significant move some point in the middle or late in the psalm. After the protest and the petition, there's praise, there's thanksgiving, there's this great confidence that God will work. And it's amazing, right? Even though John Calvin said the Psalms are the anatomy of the soul, meaning If you read all the Psalms, you'll see, the full range of human experience, all the ups and downs. That's true. But it's also often true in any given psalm, and particularly in lament psalms, that they tend to plumb the depths and end at the heights. There's this incredible emotional dynamism to these lament psalms because life is full of ups and downs. Life is dynamic. And even though the lament psalm is not exactly a formula, it's not, a mantra that if you just say these things, it will fix your problem. The pattern of the lament psalm shows you that you must do these things. You need to lament to God, direct your protest to him, to direct your petitions to him, and then to praise him for who he is. And that together, these three elements of protest, petition, and praise together make up your prayer of lament. And so, as you'll see this Sunday, Psalm 129 is a kind of lament. It's looking at difficulties that we have faced and taking all those things to God, entrusting them to him. So, in light of that, as I've been doing each week, I have my poem to read to you. While I was at the beach, I did actually work on poems for 127 and 128, but I didn't quite finish them, and I was on vacation, so I didn't bother to 100% finish them and send them out to you. I'll get those to you at some point. I'm sure you're all waiting with bated breath for those. But here is my poem for Psalm 129. They have beaten us so often. Don't we know it? They have beaten us so often, but we are not beaten. They ran over us, trampled us, cut us. The wounds still weep, but our good God has cut us free. Let them feel the fury of the whirlwind they reap. Let them be cut grass without roots, withering and shriveling. Let them come to nothing more than dust in the wind as they taste true justice. Psalm 129 is a fascinating psalm. Please join us Sunday morning at 9:30. We will worship together, hear from God, and respond to him with our hearts of lament and trust. See you Sunday morning, Cross Park. Take care.